Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. I am your host, Don Abernathy. First and foremost, I want to say Happy Father's Day to all of the fathers listening to this week's show. But this week, I am excited to announce that this episode features a segment we like to call With Those Who Were There. And joining us on today's show, Mr. Robert Glenn. Robert Glenn was part of Fox Company of the 2nd Battalion, 21st Marine Regiment of the 3rd Marine Division. And joining us on the phone right now, I'm super excited to talk to this gentleman, Mr. Bob Glenn. Bob, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Of course, I have to use a walker in the house, but outside of that, I'm doing okay.
So let's get started. Do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor happened?
Yes, I was in Miami. I lived on Edison Court, which was a housing project.
Do you remember what you were doing that day?
Well, I had been over to my grandparents, and I was walking back home when somebody came out and told me about Pearl Harbor.
And how old were you around that time?
I was 15.
15? I would assume that it was probably a 3 to 4 short years before you enlisted in the Marine Corps?
No, I enlisted in 1942, just before my 16th birthday.
Did your parents have to sign for you to enlist?
Yes.
And what boot camp did they send you off to?
To Paris Island.
So you were sent down to Paris Island. You were just 16 years old, and you went through your weapons training. After boot camp, do you remember the whole process of when you left the country?
Well, when I got through with boot camp, they had shipped us from Paris Island up to what become Camp Lejeune to the firing range there, because they were processing a lot of people at that time.
Now, as you were saying, it was soon to become Camp Lejeune, and I'm sure during that period the camp itself was probably still underdeveloped and relatively new.
Well, we were still getting our mail through the platoon, that we were assigned in Paris Island.
Okay.
They just, send it up to North Carolina. After the firing range, that's when we were assigned to where everybody was going to go. And I was assigned to the Fleet Marine Force, which I didn't have any idea what it was, but I found out quickly.
And what was your job in your platoon?
Well, at first I was just a rifleman. We were qualified first on the Springfield 03 because that's what we were issued at Paris Island.
You guys didn't get the M1 until after the end of Guadalcanal.
Yes. In fact, they stopped the final day of firing on with the 03 and changed us over to the M1. So we had to spend, I think it was 3 or 4 more days to fire the M1.
Now, I've heard stories where a lot of the guys, they weren't big fans of the M1. You guys preferred your 1903 because you had become so proficient with it. How did you feel when they took the 1903 away from you?
Well, with the 03, I fired sharpshooter. But with the M1, I just fired marksman.
So then
it was a fast change, and it was something I wasn't used to, and nobody else was. We didn't make any big impression with the M1 when we fired because everybody was used to handling that 03.
Well, and I assume the 1903 was probably more similar to the hunting rifles you had grown up with, too.
Well, I'd grown up with I was given a .22 rifle when I was, younger.
Mm-hmm. So after you finished your qualifying, you got the new M1 Garand that you weren't super impressed with. It definitely, as you stated, affected your marksmanship, but obviously in the Marine Corps, your job is to adapt and overcome. What year did you get shipped off to go into the Pacific?
Well, we were sent to the 21st Marines and the 23rd Marines were both forming there at Camp Lejeune. And I was assigned to the 21st Marines. And I joined in August 42 and went through boot camp and then was sent there. And really, we were in the forming process. So we didn't do a lot of anything but, marching and stuff like that. We were in a place, they called it Tent City, and that's the way we got our mail. Tent City, North Carolina, and we didn't use the name Camp Lejeune or anything like that.
So that was the actual postage address. When someone was to send you a postcard, they would send it to Tent City.
Yeah. They gave each one of us a 5-day liberty. And, if you, I had come from Miami, so 5 days to, you're not going to get to spend too much time at home.
Well, and back then, as well as now, but back then you guys were responsible for getting yourselves to and from the camp to wherever your liberty was, and transportation was not as proficient as it is today.
But after we come back from that liberty that we had, then we shipped out for California. And, it's the first time I ever saw snow.
What was your impression of that?
Well, you hear about it, but I think I sat in that train window and watched it all the time.
Now, at this point, before you had left Miami to go to boot camp, had you traveled much around the country, or did you primarily stay in the state of Florida?
Oh, no, I've never traveled anywhere.
It was probably pretty exciting for you to get a chance to meet some new young men and to see the country even before shipping off to the Pacific.
Oh, yeah. We were all young men. And, we got to California out there. At first, we were at Camp Elliott. Then they moved us up to Camp Pendleton.
Okay.
And Camp Pendleton, they really went through strenuous training there because it was mountains and valleys and everything. They took us to a valley that nobody was prepared for. It was so cold that we just slept in everything we had on every night. We would go out in training and we'd be wearing overcoats and everything, but the more we were out there and the sun got to us, we were dragging those overcoats and everything behind us.
Now, you guys weren't issued wool. Were you primarily wearing the cotton HPT dungarees and the jacket with your overcoat?
Yeah.
Now, you being from Florida, you probably had two surprises being in California. One, as you said, the cold and the seeing of the snow. But you grew up in a predominantly flat state. Did it take a while for you to get used to the hiking on the inclines and up in the hills?
Yeah, but we didn't have hardly any mountain people with us. Most of them were New York City, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, all up in the Northeast.
So it was you from Florida and a bunch of Yankees, huh?
Yeah. In our company, through the years and everything, there was only 4 of us in our company that were from Florida.
Sure.
And our captain that we had when we invaded Guam, he was killed on Iwo Jima. He was the first man that I knew of that really, got hit when we went to Iwo Jima.
Now, when you shipped out of California, did they send you to Australia or New Zealand first?
New Zealand. We spent about 5 months there.
That was probably, 43?
Yeah.
And so after your 5 months in New Zealand, where was your first deployment to?
Somewhere along with the company, I became a BAR man.
Ooh.
They had one in every rifle squad.
Sure.
And I became the one. Well, the 21st Regiment, when we went to New Zealand, we'd never been together as a 3rd Marine Division, but we left New Zealand, I think it was July, and we went to Guadalcanal. And that was when the first time our entire division was together.
Now, you were in boot camp of August of 42, and that's when the 1st Marine Division landed on Guadalcanal. By the time you got through boot camp and you were, stationed there at first before your major deployment, I'm sure most of the island at that point, or the atoll, was pretty much under control, and they had some decent bivouacs set up?
Yeah, we had... we went into what they had was a coconut grove. The Australians controlled it before. Mm-hmm. And we went into, and we set up every company in the coconut grove. If anybody asked us on the island, because we went to different places on the island, if they asked where we were from, we'd say we were from the coconut grove. Then they knew where we were.
Absolutely. So you started out your career being very proficient with the 1903 Springfield. They took that away from you and they gave you the M1 Garand, and then they took that away from you and they sat you down with the Browning automatic rifle. How did you take to that?
Well, I didn't get a Browning automatic. I got a Rockwell machine rifle.
Interesting.
It was the same thing, but it was a better made weapon.
In what way?
It performed better, and like after we had been to Bougainville, they had every one of the BARs examined, and I was one of the few that got their weapon back without any kind of thing being done to it.
And so a
lot of the Brownings had to have the barrel redone.
From overheating?
Yes.
So after your short deployment on Guadalcanal, where were you shipped off to first for your first true campaign?
We went to Bougainville on March the 1st.
And that's when the rain moved in, correct?
Yes, you heard about it.
I do a lot of research on World War II, but one of my strong points is the Pacific Theater. I spend most of my time reading up on what you and your brothers did and your contribution to the war. So the islands in that campaign are my strong point when it comes to this history, and so I'm very excited to have you on. So when you guys landed in Bougainville, kind of walk me through that if you would.
Well, when we left Guadalcanal on the destroyer, and we went overnight to Bougainville. Now, our outfit was in the reserve unit. The 9th and the 3rd Marines had already landed ahead of us, and we were the reserve, and when we landed, they immediately put us up to push through the front that they had.
When it comes to the gunman crew to the bar, do you have an assistant gunner, much like a 30 cal?
Well, I had an assistant ammunition carrier.
Okay. And so he was equipped with did he have a carbine or did he also have an M1 Garand?
Well, he had the M1, but he had 12 magazines that he carried for me.
You probably had the bar ammo belt. Did he have the M1 ammo belt plus a can, or did he have the bar belt as well?
Well, no, he carried an M1, but he had 2 bandoliers of magazines for my BAR. He carried 12 and I carried 12. I really carried 13 because I had one that was already loaded.
What a lot of my listeners who may not realize is that rifle, that bar, is extremely heavy. I have had the privilege to operate one, and I've had to carry one around for about 12 hours. So I can only imagine what it was like to have to live with one. I mean, that is a fine weapon, but it is very heavy, not to mention carrying all that ammo.
Well, I didn't think it was that heavy, to tell you the truth. Some of the other guys would have their ammunition carrier carry it sometimes, but I never switched it off.
Do you remember your first night in Bougainville?
Yeah, I can tell you about it. When we landed, we immediately moved up to where the front line was. And then they had a meeting up there with with our captain and their captain and all of this. And then because he told us, you know how you go in a battle formation with flankers out and all that? Well, he said it wouldn't work in that jungle.
Too thick?
They just started off going up through there, following the Numa Trail, which was almost, it was about as wide as a Jeep would go on anyway. My platoon was put in reserve. We were to escort the telephone people, anything else that they were going along. We escorted them up there. Well, when we got up there to where the company was, it was kind of disorganized. We had lost every officer except the officer of my platoon, which was behind. And when we got up there, he was the only officer that we had left in the company. And our battalion assistant, he was Major Fussell was his name. He got killed. And, well, the Japs were shooting from the trees and on the ground, too. They were up in the trees facing the way we were traveling. So you didn't see them going. You got past them is where they immediately picked off everybody that had a .45 automatic.
That's because they had realized that primarily only officers carried the .45s. Am I correct?
Well, some of the sergeants did too, the upper ones. But when we got up there, it was just a bunch of shooting going on, and you couldn't. I got behind a tree, and bullets hit right over my head. So I moved around it, like a quarter around it, and it happened again. I went around where I was halfway around it, and it happened again. And I said, good gracious, I wasn't doing nothing but going in circles. But we didn't get into the actual combat that the ones that had been before us. But our top sergeant, who happened to be a fellow by the name of Scott, he got the Silver Star because he took control and told everybody, dig in right where you are. And so that night, we dug in right where we are, and they tried to send troops up to help us, and we pinned them down.
Now, had the rain already started at this point?
That first day, I don't recall about the rain, to tell you the truth. But after that day, it seemed like you could set your watch with 4 o'clock in the afternoon that it was going to rain.
Well, and the reason I point that out for our listeners who aren't familiar, that rain caused so much mud, your foxholes would fill up with water, and so you're trying to stay what they called in the ground to get below the fire, but you're sitting in essentially a hole full of water, and you have your rifles, your ammo, you're trying to stay low, you're trying to protect yourself and your battle buddies, all while slipping and sliding through wet vegetation in the super thick mud, which made surviving and living in that environment that much worse. And that's the only reason why I want people to realize about the rain, because it wasn't just a quick downpour and then everything was fine. It really made things hard on you guys.
Well, it got to where if we were anywhere where there was standing water, if we dug down, it was to dig dirt up that we could get on that was dry. That wasn't...
Sure. And not to mention, with standing water comes mosquitoes.
Well, I've been in where I dug down to get a foxhole and wind up sitting in water all night.
Absolutely.
We had that happen quite a bit.
And so how long were you in Bougainville?
We came back in January to Guadalcanal.
And do you remember any other major combat actions during that time?
Well, every time we moved, we set up a line, and we just kept moving on like that and setting up a line. The resistance was not very much pushing on because the Japs couldn't get anything over the mountains.
Now, when it came to laying out the lines, you had your riflemen, in one area. Machine guns and automatic guns like the bar tend to draw more enemy fire. When it came to laying out the front lines, were you kind of put off away from the riflemen? Were you right in there with them? Were you behind them? How'd the layout go of when you guys dug in to create your front lines?
Well, let me tell you something about that BAR. It came with a tripod on it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got up there, we were passing on through the front when we were escorting those people up there, and some guy hollers at me and he says, "Get rid of that tripod." He said, "They look for that. They know you got an automatic weapon if they see that." So off went my tripod into the jungle, and I never had any problem where I think I was picked out.
That was really good advice because, yes, the Browning automatic rifle is a machine gun, but from a distance, the silhouette of it, the outline of the rifle itself, once you take that tripod off, it doesn't have the appearance so much of a machine gun like the Browning M1919s or the 30 cals. And so that was actually really, really good advice on his part. And I would also imagine that the wing nuts that you guys use to adjust the tightness of that tripod, going through that vegetation, staying on the ground, I would imagine that probably got snagged on your haversack, on every branch, every vine as you're traveling through the vegetation. So you probably also had the extra benefit of not having those wing nuts get snagged on everything.
Well, I tell you something they did. When we got back to Guadalcanal, the BAR men had to go like every Sunday to a firing range, and we fired. But they gave us a tripod to put on when we went. They knew that we didn't have them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the range, they gave us a tripod to use. We'd take it off when we left. We never carried a tripod again.
At the front, above the barrel, it also had the wooden handle that was on a hinge, so you guys could carry it from that as well.
No.
Yours didn't have the handle on the front, on the top?
No, didn't have a handle on the front. We didn't have them.
So after Bougainville, in the rain, and providing reserve combat action, you guys got sent back to Guadalcanal for some rest and refit. After you were in Guadalcanal again, where was your next campaign?
Well, at Guadalcanal, later on, we boarded the ship again to go invade New Ireland.
Okay.
But evidently, whatever we were doing was a fake thing to get... See, there were Japanese that still had radios on Guadalcanal that told them every time ships come in and everything. And they pulled that off to go, and the troops up there in that part of the islands and everything moved, and that's when the 1st Division, I think it was, invaded New Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Then they unloaded us off the ship. Then we went back to just regular training until we boarded to go invade Guam. You know, General MacArthur was a smart general in the way that he bypassed islands and everything, and it isolated the Japanese, and they couldn't continue on their supplying, and that was in his mind, I guess.
If I remember correctly, I believe his whole strategy was to isolate Rabaul. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. Rabaul, where the Japs had their main Navy fleet coming out of. He figured instead of invading it, let's just capture all the surrounding islands that provide support instead of having to invade it, we'll just cut off their supply lines and just let them die on the vine, if you will.
Yeah. Well, we boarded the ship to go to invade Guam, but we spent 50-some days on it because we were scheduled like 4 days after they invaded Saipan, invade Guam, but the Army division that was supposed to back up the operation was called in on Saipan, and so we had to spend 50-some days on board till they got a division from to come out to back us up.
Now, was that 53 days on a carrier ship or on your LST?
Yeah, on a transport ship.
That had to be a long, hot, confining 53 days because the living quarters on those ships weren't exactly spacious.
Well, I was telling you, suffered when we first got on there. It seems like the captain of the ship says, them last Marines he had on there stole everything on his ship, so you're going to stay where you are most all of the time. Well, they finally got our general to talk with the admiral or whoever he was in charge of the whole ships, and he finally relaxed. On that 53 days, we got up to near Kwajalein, and we spent quite a few days there, and they loaded cans of fruit and everything, and put them on the deck of that ship. And he says, I don't care about you eating them, but don't waste any. In other words, if you're going to open a gallon can of peaches, have enough guys around you that you're going to all eat them.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, when the 1st Marine Division, they landed on Guadalcanal, the George S. Elliott had sank, I think, within 3 days. The Navy pulled out, and so those guys had spent a lot of time on Guadalcanal with no real supplies. They were surviving off of what little food rations they had, plus rice and anything they found on the island. And so this admiral was under the guise of, hey, food is at a premium here. Luckily, we have supplies now, but there's absolutely no reason to waste perfectly good food when there's guys still on the front line who could use it.
Well, they would. We could go. Where the ship was in that we were in was in the middle of a atoll,
mm-hmm.
and if they would let us go swimming every day, they'd take us by the boats and they'd bring some food out there for us, and we'd swim, and we got a lot of exercise that way.
Other than swimming, did you guys just do a lot of make work, or did you guys just sit around and waste time? I mean, how'd you guys spend your idle time other than swimming when you're stuck on the ship?
We played cards almost all of the time.
What was your preferred card game?
Well, we played casino mostly, and pinochle when we went to Guam. We had to land in those alligator landing craft, which they'd take a squad in each one of them. And when we got on the land, we had to jump over the side of it.
So you guys still didn't have the rear ramp on your...
No, we didn't have any of that.
How far of a drop was that? Was that about 6 to 7 feet?
Yeah, something like that.
And so you guys probably had your upper haversack on for your light landing. You had your Browning and your helmet and your ammo belt.
Well, everybody that went in carried something extra with them. Like they might give a coil of rope to one guy, or they gave you extra bandoliers of ammunition to carry in. And whatever they handed out, you took.
Sure.
When you got on the beach, you dropped everything like that. They had people that were supposed to pick it up, and everything.
Now, did you drop your haversack too, or did you leave that on?
We dropped it.
Lighten your load, easier to move?
You were free except for your rifle, your ammunition that you carried.
And, of course, the most valuable thing of all, your canteen.
Yes. I think when we got to Guam, they had issued us an extra canteen.
Sure.
I think we were carrying 2 on when we got to Guam, because like our battalion was the only battalion that reached their objective on the first day of landing. We kind of paid dearly for it because they kept at us for about 3 days.
Do you remember what exactly your guys' first objective was? Was it a landmark? Was it a gun emplacement? Was it a bunker? Were you just told to gain so much ground? Do you remember what your first objective was?
Well, we came in and we actually had a couple of guys that got burnt with the links from the cartridge belts of the planes that come in straight in ahead of us.
Sure.
And they them little links and everything, they dropped out. They were hot as hell. We were faced, we called them cliffs, but we were able to climb them. So it wasn't straight up and down cliffs, but it was not easy climbing. And I guess that's why the Japs weren't defending that area very much, because they didn't think that that's what we do, is climb up them things.
Was the terrain on Guam, was it a lot of coral? Was it just dirt? What was the terrain like?
Well, you know, Guam had a rise up from, well, I don't know how to explain it, but like it, you had so far in, and then everything rose up to another level.
Okay.
And that's where we climbed those, we called them cliffs because they were very hard to get up. But when we got to the top of them, we were on the top of the ridge, and we dug in up there, and it was just easy for our machine guns and everything to cut them down.
Did you have the high ground over the Japs, or were you guys basically...
Yeah, we had the high ground.
And how long did you guys remain dug in on top of the cliffs?
No, we were there for 3 days, and then they relieved us. We had quite casualties up there. They had a hard time getting the guys that were wounded down and the ones that were killed. Like my best friend was killed when we got up there the first day, but yet on his grave marker and everything said that he was killed a day later, but he wasn't. He was killed the day we landed.
Now, was most of the fighting, was it heavy during the daytime, or was it a lot of nighttime fighting?
Most of it came after dark.
Yeah, that seemed to be their mode of battle.
Yeah, but we were also sending up flares, and when they it just light up like good daylight and everything, and so we could see them coming.
Now, at this point, was the fighting on Guam heavier than what you experienced in Bougainville?
Oh, yes. Yes. It involved a great deal more people. Like our whole battalion was up on this thing. But when we went on Bougainville, it was just our company that went up the way we went, that got in that fight up there with them.
Probably on your second day, you're up on this cliff. You've been dealing with heavy night fighting, a lot of charges, relying heavily on the flares to help provide visibility at nighttime. Did they just keep coming, or was it in short waves? What was their modality of
it was like in waves, but the E Company, which was to my right, they broke through them. And we, even with the flares, I could, see the fighting that was going on up on that ridge. But they never broke through where we were.
Well, when you're staring down, watching E Company engage in battle, and the Japs had broken through, it was probably very frustrating for you, because it's very limited on how much effort you can provide once the Japs are in the line, because you would risk friendly fire.
Well, that's the thing that bothered a lot of people, especially in my outfit, because in my squad, we lost one man on Bougainville, and that is because he got out of his foxhole at night. That was a no-no.
Yeah, that was rule number 1, because correct me
And
if
he
I'm...
got out of his foxhole and was crawling to another guy. And that guy shot him and killed him. So, but we were all together. That was the only man we lost on Bougainville. And, and that fellow was still with us. Well, he was a good friend of mine, too, and he got killed later on. He was my ammunition carrier.
Do you remember the gentleman's name so we can all remember him?
Lloyd Martin.
Lloyd Martin.
Yes. The fellow that got killed, his name was Newman, Alfred Newman.
Alfred Newman.
Floyd Martin was the one that killed him, and after Bougainville, he became my ammunition carrier.
And then you lost him on Guam.
Well, that was one thing that I never could understand. On the 23rd, they took us off of that ridge, and we went back down to the level ground, and we spent the night there. And we got up. They said we were going to attack through this ravine that they had, and so we started off in the attack. And Floyd Martin was my ammunition carrier, and he was right. He always stayed right next to me because we tried to use the magazines that he had. First he'd hand them to me, and the Japs come running up with a machine gun, and I fired on it, and then all hell broke loose around us, and I didn't know it. But then somebody says we're going to withdraw for a plane strike. And so when they said withdraw, I got up to move back, and Floyd's still laying there. So I said, and a fellow come running up, and he knocked me down running. But I got up, and he says, "Come on, we got to get back before they strike." And I said, "Well, I got to get Martin." He said, "He's dead." He said he got shot in the head. Well, I went back, and I sat down and unloaded my BAR, and I started to cry. And they said, "Get him out of here." And they took me out to the hospital ship. Well, all they did at first when I got there was interview with a doctor, and then they got me in a ward where they had on that ship, and they said help the corpsman in there, with things like getting a urinal to the guys that needed a urinal. Well, the pajama pants that they put on, this nurse came through and she noticed the blood on the back of my pajama pants, and she took me into an office and pulled my pants down, and there was a piece of shrapnel that had not gone in, and it was somehow irritated by the pajamas, and it bled.
Had you known the shrapnel was in your leg?
I didn't even know it.
So you were just so exhausted.
Yeah. She went and took the shrapnel out, put a Band-Aid over the place, and took me into a doctor and says, "This fellow's not wounded bad enough to be here." And he says, "Okay." I said, "Send me back to my outfit." So they turned around and sent me back to the outfit. I was gone from my company 4 days. When I got back to my squad, the fellow that had the BAR, he says, "Here, you could have this thing." And okay. So it was just, going back to what we were doing, and we were really pushing on the Japs because of they didn't want to happen on Guam what happened on Saipan. So on Saipan, they pushed the Japs up to and then they got organized together, and they pulled their last banzai charge, and they broke through the Marines. And they didn't want something like that to happen on Guam, so they had us pushing hard. Well, then we came to one place, and they said, we're not going any further. And we strung double apron barbed wire fences around our battalion. And what we did then was send patrols out every day. They all went by compass readings, and every outfit was sending them out, but they going by compass readings, and we'd go out so far, turn and go a little ways, and then come back. And we went out like that quite often. Well, it was a little bit later in the thing that we got the replacements while we were there, and we got a new officer and a bunch of these guys and they said they sent me as a BAR man and a fellow by the name of Bill Curry. He was a BAR man, and we had a Sergeant Sadowski and another sergeant, and I still to this day can't remember what his name was. But anyway, we went out on patrol with these replacements we had in the lieutenant, and the instructions were, don't fire until you let somebody else know what you're going to do. Well, I was in the tail of it. There was only one man behind me in the patrol. You kind of went on this patrol because it was jungle to go single file, and all of a sudden this fellow behind me turns around and he fired all 8 rounds in that M1 and the clip flew out.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him, I said, what the hell are you doing? We're not, He says, a Jap stood up over there and looked at me. And I said, how do you know it was a Jap? You haven't ever seen one before.
Sure.
But anyway, the lieutenant come back there and the sergeant, and they told me, to go out there and see what he was shooting at. And Bill Curry, Bill Curry was up from me about, I'd say 20 feet or more up him. And we stepped out there, and I hadn't gone very far, and there was a big tree in the jungle, and as I stepped around it, there was an officer kneeling with a 9mm automatic, and I saw the flame come off of the muzzle of that thing, but he didn't hit me. I don't know how in the world he ever missed me being that close to me or anything, but I didn't miss him. In fact, I got the automatic that he fired at me with and was keeping it as a souvenir. But then because I'd killed that Jap, the lieutenant says, I want you to lead this thing. You're going to be the point man out there. And I said, I've never done anything like that. You've been in combat, and we got to have somebody that knows what they're doing out there. So they put me out in front, and we went a little ways, and I say the Lord was with me because I heard things nobody else heard. And I turned around and told him, held my finger over my mouth, in a silent position. And I moved on, and I went around a huge tree that had been uprooted in one of them monsoons they had. And as I stepped around it, a Jap jumped right up in front of me. In fact, he was so close to me, I couldn't raise my rifle. I just squeezed the trigger where I was at. Well, the sergeant had come up behind me and another one was running off, and he shot him. But then we turned around and moved on, and as I came into an open ground, I was out in the middle of it, and I noticed some Japs behind a big tree that was off right at the corner or, edge of that little opening that I'd walked into.
Mm-hmm.
So I just stopped, and I turned around, and I motioned for the sergeant to come up. He came up, and I said, now look over my shoulder, but don't, act any way or anything. Just look. And he says, yeah, I see him. I said, all right, then let the others know that we're going to shoot. So he went back and let them know, and then he came back to me. And I said, you take the ones on the left of the tree, and I'll shoot at the ones on the right. Well, it was 2 on the left and 2 on the right. I didn't see but one, and I shot him. Well, the second one started running off, and I shot him, but he was carrying a suitcase. And when I got to him, I opened up the suitcase, and the suitcase was full of Japanese money. Good Japanese money, not occupational money or anything.
So it wasn't the Japanese peso, it was actually Japanese money from their homeland.
Yes. So when I shot another Jap a little bit further on, but...
What happened to the suitcase? Did someone take it back to...
Well, I gave it to one of the guys and told them to carry it, which they did. And when I got back, they came and they wanted to know everything that happened when we get back.
Sure.
And when we had that suitcase, and they opened it up, and it was they had some guy from headquarters come in, and he says, that's the real stuff. And he told me I could have one bill of every denomination that they had in there. And I took one of every one that was put in there, and I sent it home. But they said they could use that in other places. I don't know what they meant that they could do with it, but...
Why do you think they had it? I mean, was it the payroll? I mean, it's not like the Japanese soldiers could do much with it on Guam other than send it home. But I don't imagine they had their mail system up and running. Do you have any speculation on why they had the suitcase full of money on Guam?
No, I don't know anything about it. That they don't tell me any more about it.
Sure.
Later on, I shot a Jap that he had a sash around it, and there was a great big bulge in it. And I cut the sash up to see what that thing he had in there. And it was a tin can. Well, in that tin can, he had a silver dollar, $50, and quarter of American money. Nothing. That was all the money he had in that can. Had a bunch of other crap in there, and I took it and turned it over to somebody, and they never told me anything about it, so I don't guess it ever meant anything. It had some girls' rings in it, but they never did tell me anything. But I had never seen a $50 like the one that Jap had. Now, the silver dollar and the quarter were just common coins back then.
Sure.
But the $50, I had never seen one like it before, so I kept it. I still got it.
That's incredible.
But it was a 1862 seeded, Liberty seeded $50. And I had never seen one before, but I kept it.
That's got to be very sentimental for you.
What?
I said that has to be very sentimental for you.
Well, and
Did you?
we never did. The Japs never did get organized on our island, so eventually they had set up headquarters, and we returned back to a part of the island where our entire division was there. And that's where we were, and we prepared. They told us that we were going to go, we were going somewhere. And we boarded the ship that wound up taking us to Iwo Jima. But we were really scheduled to go to a small island off of Okinawa, so they would move the troops down close to it, and the invasion of Okinawa would take place. Well, the operation on Iwo Jima didn't go too good.
Sure.
1,000 and some guys got killed that first landing. Well, the next morning, we woke up the next morning, and they said, we're going over the side, land on Iwo Jima. Well, we got in the Higgins boats, or, the landing boats, and we went out there 6 o'clock in the morning. We stayed in them boats until almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We couldn't get into land. So we went back to the ship, and then we went over the side the next morning, and we got to land they had beached 2 ships, and one landing craft could get in between them that had protection from the fire of the Japanese. And we landed that way. And that night they said, come on, we're moving to another place. And we went up on the first airfield and started going towards the end of it. But evidently the Japs knew something about the movement, because they started firing cannons and mortars on it. We run for our lives. And we got to the end of the island, and they say, we're going to move through the outfits in front of us and move out in the attack. So that's when our captain got killed. He went up to make contact with the troops that we were going to move through. And he got killed. And next thing you know, it was about, might have been 9 o'clock. We were still sitting there, and some officer comes along and says, what are y'all still here for? We haven't received any orders. And he says, we're going to move out in the attack. Well, we got up there, and there was a guy sitting on a machine gun, and we said, we're going to move on out in the attack. And he said, you don't have to go far. They're just right out there. Well, they had sent 3 tanks up to lead the attack, and the Japanese had knocked every one of them out. And we got up and we moved to one tank, and as we started moving around it, bullets started hitting that tank. And me and 2 other guys dove underneath that tank. We never saw what was shooting at us or anything else. but we were under that tank, and we stayed there. And about, I don't know, sometime in the afternoon, a guy comes up and says, "You guys better get out from under here. We're going to tow this tank back." So we got up. We moved up to where some rocks were, and we sat there because we didn't, and you couldn't see anybody else around. So we didn't know what the hell was going on. Well, it got dark, and they turned around, and along comes a guy and says, "Any of you guys there?" Says, "Come on, we need to go over to help E Company. E Company got shot up pretty bad." Well, one reason they got shot up kind of bad was another outfit on the island went and fired on them because they thought they were Japanese. Well, we got them. We got them back to. We carried wounded back to the aid station and everything.
Now, were they mistaken for Japanese because they went out further than they were supposed to when advancing, or was it just mass confusion?
What they had done was, these abutments where they back planes into.
Uh-huh.
Well, they had gone over them, and they run into heavy Jap fire, and they started coming back over those things, and that's when everybody started. I mean, it was somebody in the 5th Division that was far to our left started shooting on them, and they fired cannons on them, and which hurt E Company pretty bad, and we went over and were helping getting them back. I'm going to tell you, that night, there wasn't any front line. And me and the two guys that were under that tank, we were wandering around. We found a Japanese gun emplacement, anti-aircraft fire emplacement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is in February, and it was cold. And they had a front move through there that rained and made everything more uncomfortable.
Had you been issued your M41 jacket, or did you just have the P41 utility jacket?
We had the utility jacket.
Which, to those listening, is essentially nothing more than thick cotton. And when that cold front moved in, it was, it
wasn't very much, I can tell you that. We found this gun emplacement, and we got in there, and there was Japanese blankets in there. And we wrapped up in them blankets in that gun emplacement place. And of all things, one of the guys turns around and he says, "Well, there was fleas in my blanket."
Oh.
Well, I don't know about any fleas because I never had any that I know of or anything. I didn't have any bites.
Now, were their blankets the thick wool similar to what you guys had, or was it made of something else?
Yeah, they were similar to what we had. They were not, we had them dark green blankets,
mm-hmm.
and these were white with a blue stripe on them.
Similar to your guys' towels.
Yeah. But the next morning, then we finally got organized up with our platoon and everything, and they decided that we were going to attack that day we didn't do anything. And I was sitting, you didn't dig foxholes, you got in shell holes. And I was sitting in a shell hole, and all of a sudden I look, and here's the biggest thing that I ever thought I'd see being shot at me. But it was an 8-inch shell from a cruiser, and it fell short of me, blew me out of that hole. And when I came back, I was going to start to eat a can of meat and beans, and well, I don't ever know what happened to it because I never. And they fired 4 rounds, and all of them were short. And our sergeant went down and he told that Navy guy that was telling them, how to fire. He went down and told him, if you fire another shell in here, I'm going to kill you.
So it was friendly fire that was coming in on you?
Well, he was on land, and these shots were coming behind the lines, or, where we were. And, they stopped. And then the next morning, we got on the edge of the second airfield, and the lieutenant told me, he says, you run across, and then we'll send guys behind you, and you get them spread out.
Is this the same one who put you on point during the combat patrol? If that's why he continued to put you these charges?
Well, I got promoted to corporal.
Okay.
After that, and they made me a fire team leader. The Marine Corps changed the lineup of a squad every invasion we made. Like when we went to Bougainville, I was the only one with the BAR. When we went to Guam, there was another guy in my squad that had a BAR. So we had 2 BARs to a squad there. Well, when we went to Iwo Jima, we had 3 BARs to the squad. They had 3 fire team leaders, and there was 4 of us. I was a fire team leader. We had what they called scout, one guy that was supposed to be out front, and we had a BAR man in him. He had a ammunition carrier, and we had 3 of these groups in a squad.
Okay.
And when they sent me across that airfield, I was a fire team leader. Well, I run across, and where I run across, I run right over a Japanese pillbox, and it was active. And when I got over it and scrambled a little bit away from it, the other guys started coming. I warned them about the toll, and I told them it's active. Well, some guys dropped hand grenades in there, but there was shell holes that, things. So I was in a shell hole, and our sergeant, he got across there, and he was to my right, and he says, we were facing a Japanese big gun emplacement. And he says, anybody got any rifle grenades? And I said, I got a launcher, but I don't have any grenades. And so he says, well, this other fellow pipes up and says, I know where some are, and he run off, and he come back with a satchel that had rifle grenades in it. So I fired on that gun emplacement, but it hit the side, and it was like powder or something, and it just dropped off. It didn't explode or anything. He said, well, that ain't going to work. Well, about that pillbox that we'd packed that we thought was knocked out, all of a sudden hand grenades started flying out of it. But they were falling short of us. And I was in that shell. There's another fellow in there with me. And all of a sudden, one of these grenades landed right on the edge of it and rolled down between my legs. Well, I jumped out of it, but I jumped right into another hand grenade. And, well, I got wounded. And I knew that I couldn't get a corpsman because the one that was with our platoon, I saw him get shot. So I knew that he wasn't available. So I just went off and started walking off. And I walked down to where I found the line of the 5th Division, and there corpsman went and he worked on me there.
Where did you get
hit? He told me while I was laying on the stretcher, he says, look up there at that Mount Suribachi. And that was when the flag was flying. I told him, I said, man, that's the first sign I've seen that we might really be winning. They took care of me and sent me out, and they took me to a hospital ship.
Where did you get hit?
Well, I got hit in the left arm, chest, and, in my left arm, a piece hit that, what some people refer to as that nerve that they call the funny bone.
Uh-huh.
Well, it hit that, and I thought my arm got blown off, really. And because I couldn't feel nothing, and I was holding on to my wrist as I walked back, and I fell down one time, and them guys in that line of the 5th Division, they say, "Come on, you can make it. Come on, you can make it." Didn't nobody run out there to help me, but when I started falling, I dropped my left arm, and blood just poured out of my sleeve of my jacket. And, well, then I got to the corpsman, and he worked on me. They sent me to the hospital ship, and being wounded, they cut your clothes off of you. They cut on your shoes. They just cut the laces completely off and pull your shoes off of you, cut your pants legs up, and, well, of course you have a belt on, but they pull the belt off, and the same way with the jacket and everything, they cut that off, and they give you a gown and stuff. And on a hospital ship, they put you in it like it's almost like a basket, shaped like a human body.
Okay.
You're not put on a cot or anything like that. But they had them in there. We were either 2 high or 3. I can't remember. But I know the next day they took me in, and of course, they knocked me out. But they did their operating, and the doctor came back to me after they put me in the bed. He come back to me, and he said, "We took that piece of shrapnel out of that nerve," and he said, "You might have to have it operated on again to get the feeling back in." Well, then I had a stroke of bad luck. Next morning I couldn't move, and there was a doctor in the basket next to me, and he went and turned and called the corpsman over there, and he said, "You better get something." He said, "This guy looks like he's got scarlet fever." Well, I didn't know anything about anything, but anyway, they had doctors come to me. Then finally they had the doctor that was in charge of the ship come, and the captain of the ship. And when the captain of the ship came back there, I heard him say, "If this man's got scarlet fever, I won't be able to unload anybody off of this ship." Well, they come to find out that I was given 2 different sulfa drugs after they operated on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a acute reaction from it.
Which
So
gave you temporary paralysis?
Well, almost. It's one guy doctor says to me that, "You've got the symptoms of leukemia, and leukemia affects your kidneys." And I hadn't urinated or anything, but anyway, they went down to Guam, and I was unloaded and sent to an Army hospital. And the Army hospital, when they came in there, this doctor says, "Give him plenty of fluids." Well, the next thing you know, I was swelling up, and he says, "We got to get him out of that bed and walking." So they had a big nurse there. She was bigger than I was, but she took me and started walking me out. And the next thing you know, I said, "I got to go." She took me in there to urinal, and good gracious, my knees like to gave out from under me for relief.
I can imagine.
But after that, I didn't have any more troubles, except with my left arm, and I couldn't I couldn't handle things in it. It's like I didn't know whether I was holding on to it or not. If it was something small, I'd drop it. But anyway, I got up and walking and everything, and then they started saying, well, since you walk, we're sending you down there to this Marine place. So I didn't know what it was. But anyway, they sent me, and there was a few others and everything. They sent us to this, what they call Marine camp, but they had just bulldozed fields flat, and they had turned around and they come out there, and they dumped a tent on the ground. They had so many of us over there and said, you got to put a tent up here, put it up in line with the other ones, and this is where you're going to live. Nobody of the people that like dumped the thing wanted to help put up the tent, and they said, no, you got to put it up. Well, I couldn't use my left arm. There's one guy that was in my company that he got shot through the leg. It never hit the bone or anything, but the bullet went clean through, and he was limping pretty bad. But anyway, we had to put up the tent. We put up the tent, and they had a very small mess hall set up for us. And so when you got in line for breakfast, when you got there, you just turned around and got in the line again for lunch. It was that long and that slow.
So you spent your days essentially waiting in line for your next meal as you just finished eating the previous one?
Then the next thing I know, they had 2 doctors that set up, and everybody had to go through them. And if they thought you were wounded, healed up good enough and everything, they sent you back to EWO. Well, the guy that was in my tent that got shot through the leg, he says, he's still limping, but he says, they're going to send me back up there. Fly him up. Oh, man. But when they turned around and finally got around to talking to everybody, and when they found out that I was a 3rd Division Marine, that was where our headquarters was on Guam. Well, they said, oh, we're going to send you back to your company. So they sent me back to where the 3rd Division, where I had a place and everything before we went to Iwo Jima. And I was there 2 days, and then they started coming back from Iwo Jima. And that was late March. And they hadn't got back, and we're back 2 days, and they turned around and said everybody that was in the original company and everything, we had been overseas for over 2 years, they said, you're going home. Well, some of the guys had got to drinking and everything, which they didn't care about that when they came back from EWO. And they were in the group that was going to go back, but they didn't know it till the next morning when we were supposed to be ready to go. But anyway, they sent us down to the harbor and put us on a Coast Guard ship that had run aground in the Philippines, and it had come to Guam to get into the what do you call where they repair those?
The boatyard?
Well, that isn't what they called them. But anyway, they said no, it was only going to be open for first-line ships. And so that's the reason they put us on it. And they told us that you're going to get to Hawaii if this ship goes into the repair dock there. Said you have to get something else to get back to the States. Well, we got on it. It wasn't a very fast ship or anything. But we got to Hawaii, and they got turned down in Hawaii. But they wouldn't let us get off the ship. So then they turned around, and they took us to San Diego. It was a pretty good long boat trip, considering that it couldn't travel but so fast.
Sure.
And It's those dry docks
There you
that they
go.
put them in
Yes, sir.
to fix them. That's what they wouldn't take them in at Guam or Hawaii, either one. But we come back to the States that way.
Do you remember what month you got back into the States?
It was in April. Well,
Now, had you had any communication with your family up to this point, or was it a surprise when you got home?
well, it was a surprise when I called them from San Diego, but I was in for a surprise. When I got home, my father, who my mother had divorced 2 or 3 years before I went in the service, he was sitting in the living room of the house when I got there. I didn't like him. And my mother and him had remarried, so I got a big surprise.
Not a good one, though. You weren't a fan.
Well, he was an alcoholic,
I got you.
and that's back when in them years before. If he worked, but you know the depression was on.
Mm-hmm.
If he worked, he went and drank it up or gambled it away before he ever came home.
And so instead
And
of
I
providing,
didn't like it.
yeah, instead of providing for the family, he went out and worked and then wasted all the money, and you guys were still scrambling to find a way to survive.
Yeah, well, that was one reason my mother finally signed the paper for me to join the Marine Corps was I could get $37 a month sent to her in allotment. So, and I had a younger brother and a younger sister. My older brother had tried to join the Navy before the war, but after he was in Norfolk for a while, they turned around and discharged him. Said he had something wrong with him that he had before, he got in the service. So
Now, since the war ended for you after you got wounded and you got transported to a hospital ship, does that mean all your souvenirs and all your personal effects were left behind?
yep. Except, when the guys came back, there was a fellow that, it was a friend of mine, but he turned around and he said he'd come and he had a bunch of Japanese hand grenades. And he come back and said, "Bob, this is what got you." And I said, "Can I have one of them?" And he said, "Yeah." So I've got it.
Had you sent that $50 home previously, or did you have it in your pocket when you got hit? How were you able to keep that?
Well, I kept it in my pocket, or that's where I kept it all the time.
And so you got lucky enough that when they cut your uniform off you on this ship, that they set your personal effects that you had on you aside so that you were able to at least
Yes.
keep your lucky corner.
Yes, they do. They put it in a kind of a little sack like your wallet or anything that was personal.
Now I want to go back real quick because you said something that was amazing, but we kind of skipped over it. You had gotten hit and you're laying on the litter, and that's when you looked up and saw the American flag that had just been raised on Mount Suribachi. And you had said to the corpsman, that's the first thing you had seen since you had been there that gave you any hope that you guys were winning this operation.
Yeah, this was the fourth day that I was there, and it still didn't seem like we had taken any, enough ground to keep on, and we were losing men too fast.
And so you kind of felt like, well, for lack of a better term, had been spinning your wheels, that you weren't able to get any traction to take any real advancements on the island.
Yeah, well, it's like those tanks that were supposed to move out ahead of us in that attack, and they all got knocked out right practically in front of us. And, hey, you ain't too happy when you're in a position to where you see those things get knocked out and you're going to have to go around them and try to find the enemy.
Sure, because they were the ones you guys called in when all the Japs were held up in bunkers and caves. I mean, they played a very important role in your advancement throughout the island.
Well, that's the same way with that pillbox that we thought got, knocked out because the guys dropped hand grenades. But I tell you the truth, I don't know how, but, just in a little while later, they're throwing hand grenades at us.
Well, from what I understand, obviously a lot of time has passed and they were able to study a lot of those pillboxes after the war. Apparently they had concrete partition in them, and so if you were to throw a grenade...
They must have had tunnels somewhere that they could also replace if anybody got killed.
Sure.
I don't know. To this day, I do know when I looked back one time, I saw a guy drop a hand grenade in there, and it come flying back out. And so evidently they knew they were going to have trouble that way, and they were able to catch it when it came to them and throw them out. I don't know if they, did that with all of them or not, because I was kind of busy doing other things.
Absolutely. You're a man with a lot of responsibility. I want to thank you very much for your time, and even more, I want to thank you for your service and everything you have done for our country.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And I greatly appreciate your time, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Goodbye.